Hello and welcome to a new video. Today I'll be discussing an interesting early build of the final level in Scorn known as Polis. Just as a quick preamble, I'd like to say that I've come to peace with the fact that Scorn is the way that it is. This isn't going to be a rant or whine or me bemoaning what the game could have been, but instead just showing off something neat that most fans of the game probably aren't aware of. There's a website known as ArtStation that exists for professionals to post their work. It's a portfolio website. And unsurprisingly, the people who post there, among them are some of the developers of Scorn. They post textures, videos, models, that sort of thing. It also has one of the worst search features I think I have ever seen. Yes, ArtStation, the word Scorn does appear in the word Scorpion, but perhaps there's a reason some of those letters were left out of my search. The overwhelming majority of things related to Scorn posted there are things that are in the game itself. Maybe some concept art and a closer look at some of the models, but nothing new under the sun that you wouldn't see by just playing through the game. There is one very notable exception, and that is the work of one Lazar Kacarevic. Most of what he's posted are paintovers of different parts of the game. Here's an area from the start of the game, here's more of the Crater Tunnel area, and later on there's one in the Crater Queens area proper. Pretty neat, but again, nothing we haven't seen already. One new thing he did show off was an alternative startup sequence for the cyborgs. For those who want their memories refreshed, here's the startup sequence in the final game. And here is his version. Rather than requiring the homunculus to be embedded into the cyborg's chassis, it seems to have been able initially to operate independently. This version is actually a lot closer to what was in the concept art of the game. The big question for me is that given how minimal the environment around the action is, was that animation supposed to take place in the Cut Blasted Labyrinth location, or was it always intended for Paulace? The only other time we've seen one of these cyborgs in any of the marketing materials that had any context as to their location was the Xbox Series X trailer. One with a design closer to the final build, with the homunculus piloting it from within, but the glass casing is completely missing. Theoretically though, it could in fact be taking place in Polis, which, speaking of that place, there is a lot to talk about in regards to his work on Polis. Polis presents itself as a sprawling metropolis. The name in fact is even the Greek word for a city. However, the actual location is quite limited. The upper area, with all the fanfare, really is only relevant for the very end of the game, while the lower area, there's a room dedicated to the Krang boss fights, and then another area where you're doing this sort of health resource managing minigame with the parasite tendrils. It's overall very limiting. There's just not a lot of places to go, which is unfortunate because the area itself is by far the most interesting in the game. You arrive at this larger-than-life location after the most difficult portion of the game. You see this towering structure ahead, but there's no towering exploration. There's 2 floors for you to run around in, and one of them is recycled stuff from a cut area, but we all know about that. Lazar's work presents a different picture. Here, for example, is an elevator room where presumably you would use these elevators to reach higher and lower floors within the structure. Here's what appears to be a monorail of some sort. Perhaps it's the early version of the one that appears in the final game. Notice how the city is visible in a kind of windowed structure to the right. Also, notice how you would presumably be able to get back into the monorail after using it. This one is, by his own admission, just a neat set piece, a cool thing to look at. In his descriptions of Paulace, he gave 2 locations, a lower city, which is what you're seeing here, and the upper city. What stands out to me is the verticality of these locations. There's all these sort of interconnected walkways where you're going to be scampering around on different levels. It appears a lot more maze-like, that there may be entrances into different rooms that have nothing in them but information about what life in the city was like. Even though the narrow bridges don't present a lot of kind of fanning out exploration, this does look like there was going to be more walkable surfaces in Polis initially, especially compared to the final product. The upper city is no less fascinating. Here's a room that kind of looks like it was going to be the centerpiece, a main focus of Polis. Looking at this, it makes me wonder if the elements that exist in Paulace in the final game, the martyrs, the giant door, even the kind of psychic brainweb thing on the ceiling, if that was more or less a late addition to the game. Granted, these environments are as simple as they can be, while still conveying a proper amount of information, so maybe Paulace was always going to be spruced up in that way. Remember the giant headroom from the Xbox Series X trailer? That evidently was a location that was originally going to be in Paulace in the upper city. And it was as grandiose as the trailer presented it, which makes me wonder if the purpose of those kind of pregnant cyborgs was ever going to be different than in the final game. Maybe they would have always had the same purpose, but the puzzle associated with them would have been much more difficult. One thing that amusingly was always considered a part of Paulace was that large vortex that appears at the very end of the actual game. Here it seems to be embedded within the city limits more, perhaps even within a singular structure as opposed to outside. Given the stark change in scenery, I have to wonder if the ending to the game would have been different. Perhaps you actually would have been able to go into that vortex at the end, rather than being cucked by the parasite. The last thing to show off, picture-wise, is just a very early blocking of the city itself. Now, it's extremely doubtful that most of these structures would have been explorable to any significant degree, but I do always have to wonder how much more of it would have been explorable than in the final game. How many more rooms were there to scour around in? How many different bits of lore and insight into the Scorn world would have originally gotten? The blockiness and just verticality of it all kind of reminds me a lot of the game Black Shard. Though it is very, very unlikely Scorn would have allowed you to explore the environment to the degree that Black Shard does. And hey, Black Shard has its own elements that remind me a bit of Scorn, specifically these large biomechanical pipes, so I guess we've gone full circle. Unfortunately, we're unlikely to get any answers to these questions, because in addition to a little bit of insight into what the game was going to look like, he also revealed a few things about the game's development woes. When asked about if all the cut locations and things were due to financing issues or resource issues, he revealed that's more due to interpersonal, office space, drama, and that kind of stuff. He describes it as more nefarious. So unfortunately, Scorn's future from here on out, more likely than anything, is going to be its Twitter account once or twice a year, posting about a sale, and that's it. Believe me, there's not a single person alive who would rather this sentiment be completely wrong, but I have to approach things realistically. So on that sour note, I hope you enjoyed the video, that I gave you something to think about and otherwise entertained you. Take care.